It is 10 o'clock, and welcome to the live program here at the Sci-Fair Library. My name is Rachel Hugenberg. I am the host of Life, and I'm one of our reference librarians here. Good morning, everybody. And so just a quick heads up about next week, as people are coming in to join us. We are having a 1920s themed costume party. So yes, you can completely and totally bring your flapper bling to join us, as we are going to be discussing our Gulf Coast read, Gods of Jade and Shadow. Sorry, it might take me a second, guys, this morning, with Regina leading the discussion. So really stoked about that. But this morning, we are also having a spooky themed, because it is October, a spooky themed guest in our program this morning. We are here today with Allie Alvis, who is a reference librarian at the Smithsonian. She works with their special collections and manages the movement of items from the vault to the reading room, as well as working with exhibitions, digitization of materials, and conservation of rare materials. Her undergrad is from University of Kansas in linguistics, where she kind of got acquainted with the idea of rare books. And she has 2 graduate degrees, both from Scotland, which is very impressive. One from the University of Edinburgh in material culture and history of the book, and one from the University of Glasgow in information management and digital presentation. She's working with rare books, and she is here this morning to discuss with us some very unique and rare books, some of them of deadly origin and quality. So take it away, if you will, Miss Alvis. We are so happy to have you here, and we really appreciate everybody for coming.
Yeah, well, thank you for that introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, get to that nice PowerPoint presentation. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, good to go. All right, just resize something here. Oh, it's covering up my notes.
I hate when that happens.
There we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, we've got all that technical difficulty out of the way. It's going to be smooth sailing, I promise. So I'm Allie Alvis. I am the Special Collections Reference Librarian of the Smithsonian Libraries. Just a side note, long ago, I started my academic career at Butler County Community College in Kansas. So I am really excited to speak at an event partially hosted by Lone Star College. So go Community College. Today, to get you in the Halloween spirit, I will be talking to you about the weird, wonderful, and sometimes downright spooky world of rare books. But what exactly is a rare book? Well, it depends on who you ask. We at the Smithsonian Libraries have 21 branches, 11 of which hold rare books. Obviously, books about airplanes aren't going to be quite as old as books about natural history, so every branch gets to define their own parameters of rare to an extent. But the 2 branches where I spend most of my time, the Joseph F. Cullman Third Library of Natural History in the Natural History Museum, and the Dibner Library of the History of Science and Technology in the American History Museum, we generally use the bounds of the hand press period and earlier to decide what's rare. The hand press period of book history lasts roughly from the time that Johann Gutenberg invented movable type in the West, around 1450, to the Industrial Revolution, which took place around 1850. During this period, every element of a book was made by hand, from the paper to the type, to the coloring of the illustrations, to the binding. Thanks to the human element of bookmaking in this period, no 2 hand-pressed books are exactly alike. Between variations, customizations, and mistakes, it's common to see 2 copies of the exact same book that look completely different. It also means that far fewer of these books were produced to begin with, meaning that fewer have survived until today. Nowhere is this variation in rarity more evident than in medieval manuscripts. But before we look at medieval books, let's head back to ancient Egypt for some context. Ancient Egyptians used the layered pith of the papyrus plant to create a writing surface. Papyrus, which is ultimately fairly brittle, lent itself to the scroll format. Works like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, often included with mummified bodies, weren't books in the way we think, but scrolls. The thing you think of when I say the word book is in the codex format. The codex format generally refers to a stack of folded pages sewn or glued together, usually sandwiched between two boards. So here is a nice scroll version of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Reproduction, obviously, I don't think any of them are in that nice shape anymore. But brittle parchment didn't hold up well to folding. So how and why did we get from scroll to codex? Well, scrolls weren't perfect tools. Reading a scroll requires two hands at all times, one to unroll at one end and one to roll up at the other. Scrolls, of course, had no page numbers, since they didn't have pages, and finding a piece of information may involve winding through yards of material. Something more portable and easier to navigate was needed. The solution came in the form of skin. Before the mid-15th century, the vast majority of European books were written on de-haired and stretched animal skin called parchment or vellum. And if any of you are familiar with Doctor Who, you might recognize Madame Cassandra over there. She is actually based on a stretched piece of vellum, which I didn't know until I became a librarian. So it's funny to see that reference in Doctor Who. Cattle, both juvenile and adult, were the most popular sources of parchment or vellum, but sheep, goats, and other animals were also used. Younger animals yielded finer, thinner skins. Generally, the term vellum is used for these skins of calves, while parchment applies to the skin of more mature animals. A calf skin usually produced about 4 leaves of vellum for a quarto-sized codex. That's, about the size of a quote-unquote normal book, and an adult could produce about double that. However, large books like the Book of Kells used the skins of nearly 200 animals. To be clear, the livestock kept by monasteries producing books like this were primarily used to feed the monks. The larger the monastery, the more livestock needed to feed the residents, and the more parchment they could produce. Vellum was available commercially, but it was very expensive. Its value meant that even flawed pieces of parchment were still used in books. Parchmenters, bookmakers, and scribes dealt creatively with these flaws. They would sometimes doodle around them or stitch them closed with colorful thread. And some of their efforts at fixing tears and holes look a bit grisly, and bring to mind the word Frankenbook. Once the parchment was prepared, scribes could set to work writing out the text of books by hand. That is what manuscript means. It comes from the Latin words manu for hand and scriptus meaning written. In the early days of the Middle Ages, this copying was largely the domain of the monasteries I just mentioned. Here are a couple illuminations of monks at work. In the later Middle Ages, this became more of an industry, and skilled craftsmen and professionals would actually make these books. But in the early days, the monasteries were the only ones who could afford the materials and labor to make manuscripts. Manuscripts could take years to write, and even longer if they were to be decorated. And human scribes are by no means Xerox machines. They were liable to miscopy text, misspell words, and generally make mistakes. Even aside from textual variation, manuscripts featured diverse types of decoration and embellishment. This could mean anything from colorful decorative initials to full-page illustrations. These decorations sometimes included fun and freaky marginal inhabitants called grotesques. You may have seen the knights fighting snails illuminations on social media, but I promise you those are by far not the weirdest things in the margins of illuminated manuscripts. Here is just a taste. And there are more where this came from. Sometimes these marginal figures were references to medieval jokes or riddles or popular songs at the time, but others are inscrutable, to say the least. In religious manuscripts, the margins were representative of being beyond the holy word of God, literally and figuratively. The text was conceived of as heavenly, while the margins were earthly, and sometimes unearthly. Such decorations like these grotesques, as well as the illuminated initials and large full-page illustrations, would have cost extra. So between the time and the materials it took to produce a manuscript, these books were extremely valuable. In the early Middle Ages, a monastery's books would be locked away in a chest, sometimes with multiple keys. Even as manuscripts became more common in the later Middle Ages, they were still a very costly thing to own. Accordingly, in addition to physical security measures, some book owners enlisted the help of the supernatural. Many examples exist of book curses, threatening anyone foolish enough to damage or steal the book in question. Such curses often wished excommunication on the guilty party, but others could be a bit more graphic. This curse, written in a Bible around 1172, reads, "If anyone take away this book, let him die the death. Let him be fried in a pan. Let the falling sickness and fever seize him. Let him be broken on the wheel and hanged. Amen." If one of those things wasn't enough to do it, any other of those things will get the thief in question. Another of my favorites is this one from the 13th century. This book belongs to the monastery of Rochester. Anyone who takes it from there, hides or keeps it, or damages or erases this inscription, or makes or causes it to be deleted, may his name be deleted from the book of life. This tradition continues today, at least sort of. I know my dad, for one, would write "think twice" in capital letters inside his expensive textbooks in college. As libraries grew in the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, keeping books locked away in a chest was no longer feasible. But how can you secure books on open shelves? A popular book security system was to simply chain the books to the shelves. Chained libraries were common across Europe from the 14th to the 17th century. And side note, the chains were for the book's protection, not the reader's. I don't know of any Harry Potter type instances where books must be restrained due to bloodlust. Now, I can hear the wheels turning in your minds. How the heck do you chain a book? Not the way you think. If you clip the chain to the book's spine, it could easily be ripped off. The answer is to mount a clip to the edge of the book and attach the chain there. The chain then ran to a metal bar that spanned the shelf and could be unlocked by a librarian who held the key. Accordingly, in this period, books were not shelved spine out, but foredge out. Foredge is the side of the book where it's basically the side of the book that faces the spine, so it's where you see just pages. This is an example of a foredge. Accordingly, in this period, some books show evidence of titles on their foredges, since that's the side that was showing on the shelf. Sometimes there are also shelf marks written on there. Some chained libraries still survive in Europe, although many formerly chained books still survive in special collections. Understandably, chained libraries pop up periodically in fiction, too. A couple recent examples include Game of Thrones and Doctor Strange, although in Doctor Strange I think the books were sort of arrayed in a honeycomb shape rather than a traditional shelf. Medieval manuscripts and early printed books have not always been as valuable as they were when they were new, or as treasured as historical objects as they are today. So one of the scariest parts of book history for me as a librarian is that manuscripts and early printed books could be dismembered and cut up for other uses once the text was out of date or out of favor. After all, the medieval vellum was still strong, and obtaining it new was still relatively expensive. So why not recycle? The cut-up manuscripts were used for a variety of things, including as structural support for a bishop's cap, lining for bags, and, most horrifyingly, occasionally as toilet paper. Hopefully, we will not be getting to that point in 2021 with additional toilet paper shortages, but, fingers crossed. But the most common place we see manuscript waste is on and in book bindings. This is a bit of a bright spot to this practice. In some cases, the only record of medieval texts we have are preserved as parts of other books. Manuscript waste could be applied straight to the book with no intervention, or it could be disguised with paint. This binding features some upcycled manuscript waste painted green. It's a relatively common German-style binding from the 16th and 17th centuries. A lot of books that look like this survive in special collections all around the world. The Smithsonian Libraries has one. This is, in fact, an image of our version of this binding. But its beauty hides a secret. A key ingredient in this green color is arsenic. Rather than being a bibliographic murder attempt, the arsenic is what makes the paint green. It comes from the yellow mineral orpiment, which was ground up and combined with an organic blue to make green. This is a well-known recipe for green paint at the time and is called vergot. It's spelled V-E-R-G-A-U-T. It can also be found in panel paintings from the same period. But how can we tell there's arsenic in this book? We certainly can't see it with the naked eye, and we haven't had any casualties as a result of this book, as far as we know. So we used a technique called X-ray fluorescence to figure out the chemical composition of the paint. XRF is a non-destructive process that takes place at the atomic level and involves knocking electrons out of place in order to cause the atom to fluoresce or glow in a certain way. As every element in the periodic table fluoresces in a characteristic way, this testing allows us to identify specific elements within inks and paints. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for organic materials, but it gives us the chemical composition. These are the results from our XRF analysis of the green covers, and the arrow is pointing to the very large spike for arsenic there. But arsenical books aren't just confined to German 16th and 17th century bindings. Sometimes it also shows up in 19th century cloth bindings. Arsenic was a key ingredient in what is called Scheele's green or Paris green, which was a popular dye in the 19th century. This dye was manufactured on an industrial scale, and it showed up in everything from wallpaper to clothing to food, as the Victorians thought that arsenic in small quantities was not damaging. Rachel and I were just talking before this talk about a book called Shadows from the Walls of Death, which is an evocatively named collection of arsenical wallpaper fragments. It is thought that the arsenical wallpaper in his island prison contributed to the death of Napoleon Bonaparte. But before you go throwing away all your family heirlooms, listen to this statistic. The Winterthur Museum in Delaware conducted a survey of 250 green books and found only 2 containing arsenic. So your old books probably don't contain arsenic, but don't lick them just to be safe. Side note, or little digression here, you'll notice that in this image, the image that we used to promote this event, I am wearing gloves while touching this book. It's one of the only instances that librarians wear gloves when handling rare books. That's right, those white gloves you see on TV and movies, false advertising. Wearing gloves reduces your sense of touch and your dexterity and makes it easier to damage a book by accident. They also get dirty very quickly and can transfer dirt from one book to another. Instead of wearing gloves, we and our researchers use clean, dry hands to handle most books. The only exceptions are books with a lot of metal on them, don't touch a book chain with your bare hands, photographic material, and, of course, poisonous books. I've spoken a lot about skin and manuscripts and pre-19th century books up to this point, but the old books most of us are familiar with are those 19th and early 20th century cloth-bound books that may or may not be poisonous. These are very different from the manuscripts and early printed books I've been talking about. For one thing, their bindings have a much weaker structure, and for another, 19th century paper is vastly different from hand-press period paper. The wood pulp-based paper most of us are familiar with didn't come onto the scene until the 19th century. Before this period, paper was most often made of heavily processed linen rags. You may remember in A Christmas Carol, you can see an engraving from an illustration of the Christmas Carol on the left there. When Scrooge and the ghost of Christmas yet to come learn what would become of Scrooge's possessions if he died as an unredeemed, cruel man. Scrooge's former servants haul all of his belongings, including sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, and bed curtains, to the shop of a London rag and bone man. Rag and bone men, or simply ragmen, were often individuals experiencing extreme poverty who combed the streets of cities for used rags to sell. Some ragmen dealt directly with paper mills, which would pay 2 to 3 pence per pound of rag. So it was not a profitable calling, but it got paper made. These sometimes disgusting rags would be soaked and treated with lime and water, cut up and beaten to a pulp before being mixed with water to form a slurry. This slurry was then scooped out with wire mesh frames to form sheets which, when dry, were a very strong and durable paper. When I give tours of the collections, people often remark that paper from the 1400s looks better than paper from the 1900s, and the linen content is why. Wood pulp paper has a natural acidity to it due to the lignin, which is a chemical which eventually breaks down to cause yellowing and brittleness. Unfortunately, being virtual today, I can't have you feel what a piece of rag paper feels like to touch, but if you have any dollar bills in your pockets, you can get the tactile idea. Dollar bills are made of a mixture of cotton and linen, which is why they don't fall apart when you accidentally run them through the wash. But the raw material of rags was not an infinite resource, so intrepid inventors set out to try to make paper out of different and unique substances. One such individual was Jakob Christian Schaffer, an 18th century German pastor, entomologist, and professor. He had a lot of stuff going on. Schaffer, inspired by fellow entomologist and Frenchman René Antoine Ferchaud de Réaumur's work on the wasps, the paper wasps of North America, published a 6-volume work on experimental paper materials. You can see a copy of this work on the right. The Smithsonian Libraries holds it, and it is quite a book. It is so long because Schaffer included samples of his experiments. His papers were made from all sorts of things, including hemp, straw, moss, cabbage stalks, thistles, potatoes, and, coming full circle, even ground up wasps' nests. Even after the invention of wood pulp-based paper, papermakers were given to the occasional odd experiment. In 1859, the town of Norwich, Connecticut celebrated its bicentennial and subsequently had flyers printed for it. This is a digitized copy of one of those flyers from Brown University Library. It is unclear exactly why, but for reasons lost to time, these flyers were printed on paper partially made from the wrappings of ancient Egyptian mummies. A man called Dr. Isaiah Deck posited the possibility of making paper from mummies in 1855, although his article on the topic may have been satire and not intended for anybody to actually try. No other evidence has been found for the use of mummy wrappings in paper, so don't worry about hiring an exorcist to cleanse your old book collection. Papermaking is just one odd use that Westerners found for Egyptian mummies. Europeans made medicine out of ground-up mummies as far back as the 12th century, and artists in the 17th to the 19th centuries used a color called mummy brown made of, you guessed it, ground up mummies. We are nearing the end of this spooky journey through the history of books. We have come now to the creepiest and weirdest bibliographic practice, anthropodermic bibliopegy, which is fancy Latin for the practice of binding books in human skin. Fortunately, similarly to the arsenic books, this didn't occur too often in the history of bookmaking, but the stories surrounding true human skin bindings are always chilling. Another statistic for you. The Anthropodermic Book Project has tested 31 of the 50 books purportedly bound in human skin, and have found that only 18 of them are actual human. The Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, which is a museum of the history of medicine, holds 3 such bindings, and I have seen 2 of them in person. This is a picture that I took of one of them. I think it was back in 2016 or 2017. They are genuinely creepy. Taking a sharp turn towards Frankenstein, the Anthropodermic Book Project has shown that the majority of human skin bindings were created by, or at least at the behest of, doctors in the 18th and 19th centuries. After all, doctors had a ready source of unused human skin in the form of cadavers or deceased patients. This practice raises some pretty serious questions about consent and medical practice. And if you want to read more about this very odd chapter in book history, my friend Megan Rosenblum has recently published a whole book all about human skin book bindings. So it is getting some really great reviews, and if you want to scare yourself about books, highly recommend it. But not all human skin books are bound in the flesh of innocence. This book is covered in the skin of a murderer. Burke and Hare were a pair of money-hungry criminals in 1820s Edinburgh, Scotland. They became murderers for hire when the University of Edinburgh Medical School required fresh corpses to examine, but faced a shortage of legally obtained dead bodies. This is where the idea of grave robbing comes from. Folks would literally go out in the dead of night and dig up fresh bodies for the medical school to examine. It was still kind of a taboo to deal with real human bodies in this time. Burke and Hare were apprehended when the doctor who purchased the bodies of their victims was discovered with one on his operating table. Burke was hanged for his crimes, while Hare got off almost scot-free due to presenting evidence against Burke. And in an eye-for-an-eye type of decision, his corpse was dissected at the University of Edinburgh Medical School. His skin was then tanned and made into a small notebook, a macabre souvenir of a murder case that captured the attention of the public. Weird personal story, I have ridden in an elevator with Burke's death mask and this little human skin book. I was in my first year of graduate school and got in an elevator in the library and looked over next to me. A librarian was pushing a cart with some strange things on it, and I innocently inquired, what are these? And he told me, and here we are. Again, human skin bindings are not very common. Some booksellers of the past have even tried to pass off books as bound in human skin to increase their value. This is the most common kind of quote-unquote human skin binding in collections. Often in catalog records, if there is a suspicion of a book being bound in human skin, the catalog will say that the book is bound in dog. I don't personally know of any books actually bound in dog skin, but the dog designation is used for signifying that, this might be human. The Smithsonian Libraries has a book that was purportedly bound in human skin, but thanks to the skilled testing of our conservators, we know that it is, I believe, pig. So, no haunting of the Smithsonian Libraries, which is always good. A creepy thing, it's all creepy, but another creepy thing about human skin bookbinding and the way that human skin looks when it is applied to a book is that it looks a lot like pigskin. It has the same sort of pore arrangement, and it's very kind of unearthly and disturbing. But you won't probably encounter any of these if you pop into a special collections, because not all rare books are creepy, spooky, or scary, but they are all fascinating in their own unique ways. Something I really want to emphasize is that although this presentation was all about the creepy side of books, you shouldn't be scared of or intimidated by entering a rare book library or reading room. Rare books are for everyone. And you can see here pictures of just some of the rare books that we have at the Smithsonian. The tall picture there is actually from the Graphic Arts Department in the American History Museum. You can see a lot of the tools used to make books, a selection of marbled papers, and then the two pictures on the right, the top one is the Dibner Library and the bottom one is the Cullman Library. And you can see I'm giving a tour down there in that second picture. So if you have any questions about using a special collections library or what I do or anything I talked about today, I would love to hear from you. You can email me directly or find me on social media as Book Historia. You can also follow the Smithsonian Libraries on social media at the tag there in the slide. So thanks again for tuning in today, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day and a fun Halloween, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Okay, guys, so if you have any questions, if you would, please, would you mind placing them in the chat? Okay, so we do have some comments from Lori. This history lesson is incredible. Thank you for sharing. I'm learning things I did not know. Some people were very shocked by the medieval marginalia drawings.
Yeah.
Including the bird.
I know, I might go back to that slide just to sort of sit on because it's a fun one. Yeah, medieval manuscript illuminators, when they made full page illustrations, generally followed basically an artistic recipe book. So they copied what people before them had made. The margins, however, show a lot of innovation and a lot of sort of humor and fun and creativity that you don't get to see in full page illuminations sometimes. They're so funky, and yeah, yeah. Where to start?
You're being asked, this is such a wonderful presentation, Allie. How did you become interested and passionate about rare books?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I started my academic career at Butler County Community College in Kansas. Initially, when I graduated high school, I wanted to be a costume designer, as you may be able to tell from my general aesthetic. But that didn't really work out, and I took kind of a winding path to becoming a librarian. So after dropping out of college and then going back to Butler County Community College, I started getting really interested in linguistics and the history of language, and the history of writing and that sort of broad topic. So when I graduated Butler, I went to the University of Kansas and studied linguistics, which is where I first started encountering medieval manuscripts, although they were facsimiles, just very good copies of real medieval manuscripts. And when I graduated from KU, I was kind of fishing around looking for something to do in graduate school because I really enjoyed academia and I liked learning. And I was married to a British guy at the time. And we were living in the north of England, and I picked up a prospectus for the University of Edinburgh's Material Culture and the History of the Book program. And I applied and I was accepted. And when I entered, I knew very little about rare books. It wasn't like, you know, I came to this field knowing everything about everything. It was a real learning experience and absolutely fascinating. And I fell in love with being a librarian, I think the first week of being in that program. So it's been a long and winding road, but I am very happy to be where I am and doing what I do. I love telling people about books. It's my favorite part of the job.
Okay, so the next question is, are there any vegan books in the Smithsonian collection?
Vegan books. Books about veganism or books that are vegan?
Maybe books that do not incorporate any type of animal product.
Yeah. Yes. So a lot of books, even if they are not directly made of skin or leather or what have you, they might incorporate animal glue into the spine. So in the hand press period in particular, that was the number one source of glue, was, the old saying about sending old horses to the glue factory. And that's just how books were held together. But moving up through the 20th century, things start to be made of more synthetics. More recent books are mostly not containing any animal products. But we do have certain Asian books that I would say are sort of vegan. We have things called palm leaf manuscripts that are literally made of palm leaves, and they are held together with just string. It's kind of hard to visualize, but think of, a long palm leaf with two holes drilled sort of in the middle, and it doesn't open like a codex book would, like a book's on your shelf. It's sort of, you lift one of the palm leaves and turn it over, and you lift again and turn it over. But there's no glue involved in that. So yeah, it's interesting, the different ways that different cultures make books. Same with Japanese books and Chinese books of the hand press period. Those are stab sewn together. Sometimes they incorporate silk, which I'm not sure if that's vegan or not. But yeah.
All right, we've got another question from Narul. Hi, Allie. Thank you for the talk. Could I ask if you found any creepy or scary written marginalia in any of the books?
I've found some weird marginalia. I haven't per se found creepy ones. Marginalia is a very common feature of old books and rare books, because the way people interacted with books in the past is very different to how we interact with books now. If someone went into the reading room and started taking notes in the margins of a 15th century book, I would throw them out by their collar and call the cops. But people, for example, monks in monasteries were encouraged to take notes in books. It was a way of engaging with the text directly, sort of engaging in a conversation with the author. Adding your thoughts to what the author wrote, adding references that the author may have missed, or even cross-indexing things. So one particular book that has a lot of marginalia is a 1492 edition of Pliny's Natural History, which we have in the Cullman Library. And there are at least 9 different people writing in this book all at the same time, because this book was in a monastery. So probably a monk would go into the chained library and pull out one of the books and read it and take the notes and put it back. Then another monk would come along and read it and take notes and put it back. Some of the monks spoke Italian, some of the monks were taking notes in Latin, some of the monks were taking notes in German. And they all had sort of different language expertise and made language mistakes, which is hilarious. There are examples of monks correcting each other in the margins. I think that's my favorite, that this is not the right translation of this Latin word. It's actually this. Someone got a bat confused with a bird or something, and they crossed out the other monk's note and put, no, it's this. There are also just sort of weird notes from completely non sequitur works that the monks just sort of wrote in there, either keeping them for themselves or interesting events that happened. There's a record of the veil of the Holy Virgin Mary that came to this monastery, that a monk sort of scribbled in one of the margins, like, I saw this and it was great, basically. So it's really interesting to get in touch with the personalities of people through their notes and margins.
Okay, we have another question. Do you have any horror stories about visitors destroying books by accident?
No, thankfully. I think all of us librarians have a story or two about accidentally ourselves dropping a book, which is horrifying, but it is important to sort of say, like, we're humans too. And that's one of the reasons why we don't wear gloves, because when you're picking up a book and moving it around, it could just really easily slip out of your hands. I think in one of the pictures I showed, all of the books were set up in supports. So let me go back to the reading room slide. I'll just sort of talk while I'm cycling through these. But in special collections reading rooms, we have all sorts of tools and supports for people to read the books without damaging them. That's a good example. So you can see that this book is kind of sitting in foam supports here. So that way it doesn't open just flat on the table. Let me get to that last slide. We also have things called snake weights, which are basically little lead bobs that are covered in cotton or linen that sit on the book to keep them open. I'm not sure if there are any. You can kind of see a few in this slide on the bottom image, little snake weights. But because the books are generally more fragile, even if the paper looks like new, we take all of the precautions that we can when trying to keep them in the same condition that we found them in, basically. Something that is really cool about being a special collections librarian is this sense that I am not the last person to care for these. I'm just caring for them sort of temporarily, and then the next person after me will care for them, and then the next person after them will care for them. And that there's this whole line of special collections librarians before me that have protected these books and ensured that they've come down to us in the condition that they are. So sometimes we have to firmly encourage people to use proper handling techniques. But we haven't had anybody come in and start rifling through the rare books or anything.
Okay, in the future, when we can travel, is there an area of rare books for the public to tour at Smithsonian, which was followed by, can you tell us about the tours you offer visitors?
Yeah, so unfortunately, both of the rare book reading rooms are not in public space, but we love giving tours. So you can email either me, Alvis A, at si.edu, or ask a librarian at si.edu. We like showing off the collection, and we can arrange sort of a behind the scenes tour, which makes it even more special. And if you want to be a reader, we also accept applications. They're not even applications. You just say, I want to be a reader. Let me look at this book. And we say, okay, let's register you. And there you go. Now you're a reader. And, you know, you can look through the catalog and pull out, well, we will pull out for you the books. Special collections are not quite the same as the public libraries that you're used to, in that you can't take the books with you. That is so, you know, our $500,000 copy of Maria Sibylla Merian's work on the insects of Suriname isn't appearing on eBay or something. It's just sort of a security measure, and also that way you have all of the resources to read it in the reading room with all of the book supports, and the resources that are the librarians, so you can ask questions and stuff. But yeah, soon when we can travel. There are also 2 exhibition spaces that we maintain in the American History Museum. There's a nice sort of little room that's right in front of the Dibner Library. So if you go all the way into the back there, you can knock on the door and one of us will be in there. And then there's a smaller space in the Natural History Museum where we display our collections in cases. So I'm currently working on an exhibition for that smaller space right now. So hopefully we'll be able to go back sooner rather than later and put that in there.
We've gotten a thank you for the great talk, Allie. We've also gotten another question. Do you have researchers visit often? Anyone trying to make a new discovery or uncover secret marginalia?
I think that every researcher that comes in makes a new discovery. I know that sounds really cheesy. But a lot of these books, you know, we might hold one of 2 copies in the world or one of 3 copies or the only one. So every time someone comes in, they're finding something new or seeing something that they haven't seen before. A lot of our researchers are curators and postdocs and predocs and scientists who work actually in the Smithsonian Museum. So Smithsonian people. That's really why we were established, to serve the sort of in-house researchers. But as time has gone on, we've opened our doors much more to outside researchers. We get a lot of people in from area colleges. We have Georgetown right down the road, all sorts of different places. And everybody's looking for something different, which is always very interesting to hear what different researchers are working on. I think John Overholt, who is the Special Collections Librarian for Harvard, said that librarians are fire hose drinkers in terms of information. We know some about a lot. So I think every time a researcher comes in, I learn something new too. So it's really a give and take relationship. I'm trying to think of like what the coolest thing that someone found is. I am regularly called into the reading room to say like, oh, look at this cool thing. Whether that's like the author's own annotations that we didn't realize were there, or it turns out that this manuscript is actually a reused piece of vellum and you can see writing that's hiding under the illumination, or this engraving doesn't belong in this book. It came from a totally different book. What is it doing here? So because rare books and books from the hand press period are so unique, every single one of them has its own stuff going on. Every researcher that comes in, I think, finds something new and cool. At least I hope so.
Is there a catalog to look at?
Yes. So if you go to library.si.edu and click on research, you can find our catalog. We have kind of 2 catalogs. There is OneSearch, which is it's a combination of our physical holdings and our digital access holdings. So that's all the journals, all the ebooks, all the articles, all that stuff. If you go to, I think, browse the catalog after you go into research, you can get to Siris. That is spelled SIRIS. And that is the catalog of our physical holdings. And that's where we live really in special collections, because, you know, if a researcher wants a book from 1787, we don't want the Google Books scan of it. We want the book, because that's what they're looking for. And within Siris, you can limit to different branches. As I said, the Smithsonian Libraries has 21 branches, so we have quite a variety of books. Everything from African American history and culture to air and space to natural history to, I mean, you name it. We even have a branch down in Panama called the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. So we have a lot of stuff in a lot of places, and we're always excited to have people ask questions about it and ask to see it.
Lori is asking, do you ever have families leave their collections with you?
Yeah, so we do get bequests and donations. The Dibner Library was actually founded on such a donation. Bern Dibner, who was an engineer who made it big in electronics in the early and mid 20th century, he collected books on the history of science and actually donated his collection to the Smithsonian in the 70s. So although the Dibner Library has books now that are not from Bern Dibner, the library has grown quite a bit since Bern gave his books. That forms sort of the core of the collection. Sort of same, not really same deal, but similar deal in the Cullman Library. We have the Russell E. Train collection of Africana. Russell E. Train, we kind of brokered a deal with Russell E. Train because he was a friend of Joseph F. Cullman. And he gave his collection of Africana, works about safari and African exploration and Stanley and Livingston and all that sort of thing to the Cullman Library. And so that still exists as a unit within the Cullman Library, which it's really cool to know that, you know, someone collected all of this stuff as one thing, and we still keep it as that one thing. It keeps a lot of context, historical context with collections like that. But we also do get donations of individual books, and we are happy to advise you on what to do with your old books, how to take care of them. We cannot appraise them because federal rules, but we can point you to resources where you can find out how much they're worth or, you know, how to safeguard them.
Okay, there will be a reader's advisory list to go with this presentation that Regina is currently working on, and it's going to be released as soon as it's finished. My question to you, Allie, is do you have a particular favorite rare book or manuscript or work?
I think, like many special collections librarians, I kind of have a rotating list of favorites. The Pliny that I talked about earlier with all of the marginalia in it is definitely one of my favorites. It's just so full of cool stuff and personality. I think outside of the Smithsonian, one of my favorites is, I don't know if I even have a picture of it in here. The Schaffer is really growing on me, honestly. It's another one that's just really weird. And Schaffer labels all of his paper specimens as, you know, what they're made out of. And it's so strange to be paging through this, and like you can really feel the grittiness of that, like the thistle paper. And it's so strange to think of Schaffer, like, you know, sitting in his workshop grinding this stuff up and making it into a slurry and, you know, actually scooping it out and making this paper. It's just really fascinating. So I think all of my favorite books really have a strong connection to individuals of the past. I just think that is a very cool aspect of rare books, that you're connecting across time with either the author or the scribe or the papermaker or the person who colored the plates or anything like that, that there is this connection. And, you know, in a reading room, you're reading the book in the same way that someone in the 1400s would be reading the book. You're turning the pages, you're opening it, you're, you know, going down the page. And that's something that you don't get to do with most historical objects. You know, you don't get to drink out of the communion cup from the 1300s, which understandably so, it's a different kind of thing. But books are machines in a way, and they're made to be used and interacted with, and that's how you get the information out of them. So I think that my favorite sort of subset of books are books where that individuality and the maker really shines through.
Okay, one last question that I have is, you mentioned an exhibition that you're currently working on. Can we just have a little snippet of that?
Oh yeah, a sneak preview. So interestingly, when Regina approached me, I've been working on this for ages, but it really fits into this presentation in that it's about the materials of the book, the natural history of the book. So a lot of what we're talking about is, animal products were used. It's animal, vegetable, mineral. So we're talking about the different plants that were used to make paper, or the fact that books that are written on parchment tend to have wooden boards because the wood is heavy and it keeps the parchment flat. Parchment tends to wrinkle up when exposed to humidity. And then in mineral, we're talking about different pigments and how gold leaf is used, and the arsenical book, and the metal used for engravings. So it's a wide variety of the stuff of books. And something that has come in really handy, because I know most of us are still at home, the Smithsonian Libraries are definitely still at home, is that we have digitized a lot of our collection. By far not all of it, but a lot of it is available for free online to look at and download. You can access it at our digital library at libraries.si.edu. Or you can also access a wide variety of natural history literature through the Biodiversity Heritage Library. That's where all of the books that we scan from the Cullman Library end up. It's a free and open source resource that you can pop onto with lots of partners all around the world scanning things and uploading it to the Biodiversity Heritage Library. So that is biodiversitylibrary.org.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Allie, for being with us. We're getting a thank you, librarians. This was a fabulous presentation so much. Thank you so much. So I'm sure it is also so much a fabulous presentation. Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you for having me. It was really fun to prepare this and present it in this way.
We have really enjoyed having you at Life, having you answer so many questions and show us so many snippets of history and snippets of the Smithsonian's archive, which is, I'm sure, something that most of us don't get to see on, a daily basis. So big thank you to you for coming out and sharing your expertise and your interests with us, and for giving us a sneak preview a little bit on, what might be upcoming at the Smithsonian. We're getting another thank you. I learned so much and really enjoyed all the photos, anecdotes, and fun, informative presentation. And thank you also to Regina Vitolo for all of her work in bringing you to life and making this a possibility, and to you, Allie, as well, for all of your work on compiling this awesome presentation with all of the graphics and snippets of interest. I really love getting a glimpse at archive works, so it was a real pleasure and a treat to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And again, if anybody has questions that they want to ask later, email me. I love responding to emails. I love responding to like in-person inquiries more, but tis the times. Yeah.
I'm sure at some point we'll look back at virtual archives of the art wings of the now. With that in mind, speaking of rare books, every year we pick one book for our Gulf Coast read, which is not in the same sense rare, but it is singular. And next week we are going to be discussing Gods of Jade and Shadow, come in your best 20s attire or your favorite spooky costume and join us with Regina Vitolo, and we're going to have a fantastic book discussion to celebrate Gulf Coast Reads. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Have fun with that. I don't know how to leave.
Okay, I'm going to just go on ahead and
Okay, thank you.